So it is my absolute pleasure to introduce the two speakers who are going to co-present this. Keep on talking. Bear with me 1 second. And I'm back. Okay, so the next paper is co-presented by Mariana, Rios, Maldonado, and Andoni, Cossio. So Mariana holds a PhD in comparative literature from the University of Glasgow. Congratulations, Mariana. She graduated just earlier this week, and massive congratulations. Her research focuses on ethics, philosophy, and otherness in Tolkien's literary production, as well as Germanophonic fantastic literature between the 19th and 20th centuries. She has published articles and reviews in Fantastica, Journal of Tolkien Research, Post-Medieval, and the edited collection, The Romantic Spirit in the Works of J.R.R Tolkien. Yes, Mariana and I have worked for quite a while on this book. There are a couple of authors who are also presenting today, so it might appear once more. Who knows? Go buy the book, please. Please. Okay, so Mariana is the Officer for Equality and Diversity at Glasgow University Centre for Fantasy and Fantastic, and part of the editorial team for Malorn, the Tolkien Society's academic journal. Andoni Cossio is Assistant Professor of English at the University of the Basque Country. He is also Research Affiliate at the Centre for Fantasy and the Fantastic at the University of Glasgow. His writing on C.S. Lewis, William Shakespeare, and mostly J.R.R. Tolkien has been published in A&Q, a quarterly journal in short articles, notes and review, English Studies, The Explicator, IEL, Interdisciplinary Studies in Literature and Environment, Multicultural Shakespeare, Translation, Appropriation and Performance, Journal of Tolkien Inkling Studies, the Journal of Spanish Society for English, Medieval English Language and Literature, and in peer-reviewed edited collections of essays. So a tour de force from both Mariana and Andoni here. Welcome both to our virtual stage.
Thank you.
Hello.
We can hear and see you. Do you have a PowerPoint you're sharing with us?
Yes. There we go.
Lovely, we can see that.
Okay, let me just... There we go.
Over to you.
Okay, thank you so much, Will. Thank you so much to the Tolkien Society and everybody joining us in person there in Leeds and online. It's an honor to be here and to present to you our presentation, but what we will turn into a paper called The Romantic Imagination of Gustavo Adolfo Bécquer and J.R.R. Tolkien. So what we're going to do today is to delineate how we propose to construct this study, which we will consolidate in a full-length peer-reviewed article later this year. So let's begin. As Will Sherwood states in the introduction to the Romantic Spirit in the Works of J.R.R. Tolkien, historically, Romanticism has been woefully overlooked in Tolkien scholarship, and yet, whether a conscious or unconscious act, Tolkien was incorporating and building on tropes, ideals, worldviews, and aesthetics that were during his lifetime associated with Romantic artists, philosophers, and authors. The past 20 years have seen a shift towards a more emphasized inclusion of Romanticism and the Romantic in the field of Tolkien studies, as evidenced by Romanticism being placed at the center of the German Tolkien Society's annual interdisciplinary conference in 2010 and its resulting conference proceedings, the publication of Julian Eilmann's groundbreaking 2017 monograph, J.R.R. Tolkien, Romanticist and Poet, and the release of the Romantic spirit in the works of J.R.R Tolkien earlier this year. Our presentation continues exploring the points of encounter and divergence between Tolkien's literary oeuvre and the multiple strands of artistic expression dubbed as Romantic by elaborating a comparative study between Tolkien's literary production and that of Spanish Romantic author Gustavo Adolfo Bécquer. The goal of our paper is, however, not to offer conclusive proof of potential influence, the potential influence that Bécquer may have had on Tolkien, or that Tolkien in fact read Bécquer's legends, as no evidence has been uncovered until now of Tolkien's familiarity with Bécquer's literature. Rather, we seek to visualize how two authors, distinct in the language, place, and time of emergence, share a romantic practice that infuses their literary endeavors.
Some members of the audience may have heard of Gustavo Adolfo Bécquer, an exponent of late Spanish literary Romanticism, and perhaps even read some of his works. Regardless of your knowledge of the author, you're probably wondering why and how Bécquer and his works could further our understanding of J.R.R Tolkien. We argue that when the fiction, and in particular their prose, are played side by side, the distinct tang of their creations is not so different. Moreover, not only in the fiction do we find similarities, it is worth pointing out that Bécquer and Tolkien shared several traits that helped to overcome the historical, cultural, and age gap that sunders them apart. Both were left orphans as young boys, struggled in their early years, and found solace in Catholicism. As they grew up and matured, they took up painting and writing, the later activity turning into a source of income for Bécquer through journalism and other activities, and becoming part of Tolkien's academic duties and private amusement he later monetized. Bécquer and Tolkien wrote poetry and prose with passion, and they relied on a literary circle that spurred them on to continue creating. They also espoused conservative political views and had a comparable attitude towards the dangers of modernity, which they tried to address and even redress through their fiction. Since both were born in times of change and upheaval, it is not surprising that they used their vivid imaginations to deal with trauma and disenchantment through the fantastic with a strong influence of folklore. Bécquer was trying to achieve that by means of updating the by then deceased subgenre of legends, and Tolkien by modernizing the traditions of the fantastic inaugurated by authors like MacDonald and Morris, as well as bringing forth a new genre within the literary landscape of the mid-20th century. Bécquer tried to preserve the customs that he thought would disappear with the Industrial Revolution and machines. For him, his legends were contributions to a tradition to be handed down for future use. Bécquer established a dialogue with the past that was relevant in the present, because the legends were published in newspapers and magazines. His attempt, or rather success, was not wholly different from that of Tolkien, in that both tried to rescue from oblivion a mythical past that had the power to re-enchant the land by romanticizing it.
For our study, we will deploy Julian Eilmann's reframing of the Tolkienian concept of recovery. In On Fairy Stories, Tolkien names recovery as one of the main functions of fairy stories, which he then defines as the regaining of a clear view, seeing things as we are or were meant to see them. For Eilmann, recovery underscores how fairy tales, or fantasy in general, is able to uncover the marvel in the mundane, which can be directly linked to the concept of romanticization. Eilmann then connects the perspective through which recovery is possible with a romantic view, arguing that, by looking through the romantic perspective glass, the prosaic world is more clearly visible and at the same time re-enchanted, so we are startled anew. In the romanticist view, such an enchantment does not mean a step backwards into an unenlightened or childlike thinking, at least not with regard to the metaphysical truth connected with it. In this sense, Tolkien's stories about fairy recover elements of the primary world, which are then seen anew in Arda, as evidenced through the construction of this fictional world throughout the author's literary production. Rather than arguing how Tolkien romanticized real-world places like Bécquer, which we will detail further on in this paper, we want to focus on how fairy is the world in a romanticized state. The world within these texts doubles as both a reimagined version of our primary world and a secondary world. Furthermore, Middle-earth affords the protagonists of texts like The Lord of the Rings and the Silmarillion instances in which they are marveled and startled anew by the world they have come to consider familiar and known. Re-enchantment in Tolkien's works thus functions both at the level of the reader and at the level of the narration, where characters marveled at the veiled or yet to be explored wonders of the place they call home. As for Bécquer, this poet romanticizes the Spain of his literary creations by weaving into his short stories the history, landscapes and ruins of desolation, and popular traditions of real-world places like Aragon, Catalunya, Toledo, Sevilla, and Soria, along with the offspring of his own imagination. These stories emulate the German Romantic model of the Kunstmärchen, generally involving magic or the supernatural, and often set in medieval times. This fantastical vision of Spain's past and present, recreated in Bécquer's Leyendas, went against the grain established by the historical, realist Spanish literature of the 18th and 19th century, making it a recovery of the world known to the author and his readers.
Bécquer published his legends in newspapers and magazines from 1858 to 1864, early in his adulthood. The two legends under analysis in this paper were published in El Contemporáneo, a conservative newspaper published in Madrid from the 20th of December of 1860 until the 31st of October of 1865. All are set in Soria, Spain, and contain religious connotations throughout. It must be noted that although there are traces of Northern European and national folklore, these are only the ingredients for an original, highly personal, and sophisticated tale. The supernatural element is subtle, an alternative empirical explanation are offered throughout the tale, though it is proven by the end that logic cannot account for all the otherworldly occurrences. These legends were not, however, an act of escapism through literary creation with interpolations of the fantastic, but rather interpretations of reality through fiction.
For our comparative study, we will undertake two different strategies, a comparison on the basis of theme and a comparison on the basis of a close reading exercise. In terms of theme, The Lord of the Rings presents a series of places that either, through the Hobbit-centric perspective of the novel, or in the popular knowledge of the inhabitants of Middle-earth, quote, constitute a mysterious other and symbolize the danger of straying beyond familiar territory. Examples in point are the Barrow Downs in the Fellowship of the Ring and the Paths of the Dead in the Return of the King. Whilst a more detailed account of how these places came to be does not form part of the novel's main plot, the lore surrounding them adds depth to Middle-earth as a fictional construct and challenges the main character's understanding of the world they inhabit. In both the Barrows and the Paths, evil shadows or accursed creatures have made these places their abode, transforming them into sites of peril and death filled with the echoes of the past that are juxtaposed to the events of the novel's present. The Barrow Downs remain on the fringes of Hobbit lore, but do not belong to Hobbit history. Spirits have animated the bones guarded by the mounds, infusing them with the memories of battles lost at the hand of Carn Dûm and Angmar. In The Return of the King, the Paths of the Dead appear as a place with a fell name, which the living avoid and from whence none have come back to tell the tale. As made clear by the Lord of the Dunedain, former worshippers of Sauron and traitors to Isildur's cause are now cursed to walk its hills and passages as the sleepless dead. In El Monte de las Ánimas, or the Mountain of Souls, Bécquer intertwines fictional events and characters of the Middle Ages with real-world places in Soria and the River Duero. Whilst the plot addresses the tragic story of seemingly unrequited love between the main characters Alonso and Beatriz, the storyline takes place amidst the ominous lore of the Mountain of Souls. Like the Barrows and Dunharrow, the mountain in Bécquer's legend is a place to be avoided, for on the night of All Hallows, the ghosts of Templars and local noblemen leave their graves to reenact the battle that led to their doom, and to hunt down those who dare trespass their domain. These spirits are trapped in a void or purgatory, and similar to the wights and the sleepless dead of Tolkien's Middle-earth, they are not benign. The mere sight of them freezes with horror the blood of the bravest, turns their hair white, or the whirlwind of their fantastic race entrances them. In Bécquer's legend, Alonso dies eaten by the mountain's wolves, whereas Beatriz, found dead with a horror-struck countenance, is witnessed as a ghost who runs endlessly around Alonso's tomb, being chased by the mountain's ghoulish dwellers. Here, Bécquer romanticizes encounters with the past by wrapping them in an aura of spectrality that inspires readers to look at Soria anew.
And now the close reading. Los ojos verdes, the green eyes, tells the tale of a malicious Andine who enchants Fernando, an older man who spends the rest of his days by her pool until the spirit causes Fernando to drown himself. A particular scene in this legend exudes an air of romantic enchantment, as Fernando narrates. I believe I saw, glittering at its bottom, the pools, a strange thing, very strange indeed, the eyes of a woman. Perhaps it was just a ray of sunlight that mingled through its foam, perhaps one of those flowers which float among the algae at the bed of the pool, whose calyxes are often of the color of emeralds. I do not know. I believe I saw a gaze that locks its eyes on mine. This cheerful description of Fernando's first encounter with the Andine contrasts starkly with the last, not only in the change of weather and time of day, but also the morbid, romantic elements described by a more objective narrator. The night began to lengthen its shadows. The moon shimmered on the pool's surface. The puffs of wind made the mist swirl, and the green eyes glowed in the dark as will-o'-the-wisps that ran over the glimmer of the foul waters. Tolkien leans towards this last quotation's tone and atmosphere in the dead marshes. When Frodo describes the sight of the dead, I have seen them too, in the pools when the candles were lit. They lie in all the pools, pale faces, deep, deep under the dark water. I saw them, grim faces and evil, and noble faces and sad, many faces proud and fair, and weeds in the silver hair, but all foul, all rotting, all dead. A fell light is in them. Tolkien and Bécquer seek different narrative ends with their descriptions, but that does not diminish the great number of similarities. Both attempt to convey through their respective romantic portraits an uncanny aura of life that extinguishes, placing the emphasis on light, especially the ignis fatuae. Bécquer, unlike Tolkien, died in obscurity. His editor's postmortem efforts were key to secure his national and international fame. Although Tolkien passed away as a renowned author, posthumous efforts have been instrumental in helping readers understand his work, mind, and fictional world better, as evidenced by the editions of his unpublished pieces. What we wanted to achieve in this particular paper by comparing and contrasting these authors side by side was to first demonstrate how they can be connected in the treatment of romantic motifs and the different approaches. Second, we wish to emphasize that literary scholarship in both Spanish-speaking world and the Anglosphere has everything to gain by pursuing these comparative analyses, which underscore Tolkien's universal relevance.
Thank you. And here's our bibliography. As you can see, we try to find connections also between what we know of Tolkien's relationship with the Spanish language and Spanish literature, and also finding relevant bibliography in terms of how Bécquer adopted his romantic practice and how we can think about space and place. So this is still very much a work we look forward to building, even though 20 minutes is not enough. And Bécquer has so many legends and there's so many other things that we want to draw on, but we wanted to share with you this sort of like incipient step in how we want to reconnect sort of like elements of Tolkien and the Anglosphere with traditions that Andoni and I share as Spanish speakers and also from different countries and places in the world where Bécquer is a fundamental part of our understanding of literature.
So thank you so much, and we would welcome any kind of comments and suggestions. So thinking especially about the time when we start actually writing this for submitting it to a journal. Thank you.
So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. There we go.
Hello. That was a phenomenal paper. Thank you so much for coming and also attesting to the power of this kind of comparative literary study. So thank you for enlightening us on a new writer. And I could see in the chat that some people are familiar with Bécquer and now want to go and revisit. So not only have you been teaching us about Tolkien, but also, you know, bringing a new writer to us. So thank you. Questions? Yes.
Mariana and Andoni, that was amazing. Thank you. It's a really quick question. Are there English translations of Bécquer available?
Would you like to take that question, or should I go ahead?
I think we can both answer sort of like, because we have, the short answer is yes. The long answer is, are there satisfactory translations for the 20th century? I think Andoni and I agree that no. So
what we did was all translations are our own. We didn't find that the available translations were faithful to the text. Some of them tried to stick to the literal meaning. Others tried to attempt a freer translation, but none of them really worked for the passages that we wanted to analyze. So we decided to translate them anew.
Yep. We look forward to your translations coming out in the near future.
yes.
And also
especially
go on.
Especially like, for example, one of the sections where I read this idea of ghostly riders, so the fantastic race, the literal translation that we found was basically that these riders capture or take those who they find in their path, which I thought was very reminiscent of the idea of the wild hunt. But at the same time, the way that it's made in Spanish, and Andoni pointed this out very brilliantly, is that there's also sort of a sense of fascination or fixation. It's not only that you're taken away in the physical term, but it's also how basically you are enraptured, so to speak. And that is something that can be translated very well. I think it's very easy to say that in Spanish, but in English, we really struggled to convey, like, to find how to convey that meaning.
And it's
yes,
quite
like taken
that...
by the good folk. Yes, exactly. That's kind of like where Bécquer is going. Yes.
And it's quite interesting that in the previous translations, it was always in the physical sense. They didn't convey this meaning at all, which I feel is the correct reading.
That's wonderful. Thank you for embellishing on your answer there. And you know, Mariana, as you said, each language, you know, it's when you translate it across, there's naturally going to be gaps in there. So thank you for bringing that to our attention. So we do have an online question asking, how did you first think about relating Tolkien to Bécquer? Is it something, as it's something that the speakers at Ashlyn never considered? So yeah, how did you come to this idea?
I must say that this was Mariana's idea. She approached me with the idea, saying whether if I would like to write something together with her. So I'll let her speak about this.
So I came to Andoni and I was like, listen, I got an idea. And you tell me if this is absolutely nuts, but I think there is something here. Because growing up, I loved Bécquer's Legends. And now sort of like in this kind of, I have a background in comparative literature, and I've already done, for example, a comparison between Tolkien and Hoffmann. And I find that Bécquer is very reminiscent in many ways of Hoffmann's also fantastic practice. And the way that Bécquer deals with place, this idea of how important the past is and how the past is still echoing and reverberating into the present, this idea that very much everything is alive in place and space, I always thought that was a connection with Tolkien. And to be fair, like I am a very big admirer of Andoni's work. And I thought if there's somebody who's going to understand this, it's him. So, and yeah, like fortunately it was like, yes, I see the same things as you. You're not nuts. And so that's why we're like embarking on this project together.
And we look forward to the co-authored monograph on that. Okay, do we have another question in the room? No, okay. So there we go. All right.
Thank you both. That was really wonderful and all new to me. And I'm just wondering if there are other authors that that you feel no one's really talked about in connection with Tolkien that could usefully be brought into conversation with him.
Oh wow, that's a question, isn't it? That's a big question. Do you want to start, Andoni, like from your own personal experience?
Yeah, I can mention this. So Fernández Bru in Uncle Kuro mentions that Tolkien had access to Father Francis Morgan's library. And he speculates about the volumes that could have been contained in this library, which was lost after his death. And well, he proposes a series of alternatives, and it could be quite interesting to try to reconstruct that, although it's quite difficult. The only problem is that Mariana and I talked about this, and we should also consider a couple of things, which is which was Tolkien's knowledge of Spanish at the time, and also what kind of acquaintance he had with that particular source, right? To prove not only that the volume was in that library, but whether he had actually read it. So apparently Tolkien liked to borrow Morgan's books and try to learn the language from them.
I think like that relates to sort of like what we could say if there is anything to go on for like a Spanish connection. So I think also that what I think is amazing about comparative literature is that it basically establishes this idea that nothing is created in a vacuum, nothing is ex nihilo. And this is more than just arguing so sort of like, you know, that you have concrete evidence of a connection without any form of doubt. Because after all, you know, ideas, culture is transmitted in very, you know, different and sometimes unsuspecting ways, which is what makes it so marvelous to be able to compare authors from such different time periods. And so for me, for example, like I think there's more to be said in terms of Hoffmann. So I think because Hoffmann was also, for example, a poet, an illustrator. So I think that there's something there in the German Romanticism vein. I think, for example, Bécquer is a good example because of his use of legends. I have sometimes also wondered in terms of, so I look a lot also on contemporary German fantasy. So I think there is something there that, yes, it is indebted to Tolkien, but they draw, for example, in their own interpretations of the Rings of the Nibelung. So it would be interesting to do that comparison to see how this material is retreated, if that makes any sense. The sky's the limit. really. And I think this is only kind of like an invitation for more people to be able to, you know, I would say even like look at these possibilities and dare, because there's so much that we could gain from connecting Tolkien to other languages and other traditions and other times beyond the Anglosphere, which is kind of like also our main argument.
And I suppose as well, considering, you know, he consciously talks about himself as a linguist and a philologist, that is a powerful invitation, and we should perhaps be doing a lot more of that. And considering that, you know, looking beyond the Kalevala, for example, exactly like you're doing here, and your excellent chapter on Tolkien and Hoffmann in The Romantic Spirit, in the works of J.R.R. Tolkien. So yeah, can we give Mariana and Andoni one more round of applause, please?